Okay.
So, hi everyone, we are back. We have the privilege to have Dr. Robert Boyd joining us today. Dr. Boyd, welcome.
How do you do?
Great. Dr. Boyd, we'd like to introduce yourself. I think that you do a better job than I do. Just introduce yourself and tell us what are your perspective, how it's going over there.
Well, I'm doing pretty good. I worked for many years and as a professor in several universities, eventually becoming chairman of several orthodontic departments, University of California, San Francisco, and then my last position was University of the Pacific, and I retired last July. And but I retired to still a bit of a busy week, and what I'm doing now is continuing teaching part-time as a professor emeritus, and then I am also pursuing consulting work with the Invisalign company, and long history of involvement with the Invisalign company over the years, literally because I was asked when there was just 4 people in the company, and I think there's about almost 20,000 now, to look at that product. And I, quite frankly, I was amazed at what I saw and amazed at the potential. So my shift of my studies, efforts, teachings, and everything started switching after I saw Invisalign. And I did the first clinical study of it back. We met in 1997, just as they had gotten their first patent. And then we started work in 1998. And then it was released around 2000 to orthodontists and 2001 to general dentists. And I've been working on it ever since. My work with the Invisalign company was primarily in the research and development department in creating new tools for the doctor to do more successful Invisalign treatment, and of course, scope of treatment. I started out, I had a list of things that Invisalign couldn't do that I developed in 2000, the year 2000. I saw that at a lecture, and since the year 2000, up to about a year and a half ago, I had carefully gone through each one of those things, and they included things like extracting teeth, correcting a class 2 person with overjet, correcting an underbite, and so moving impacted teeth, using Invisalign with orthodontic surgery patients, and so on. So each one of these things, which to me was a goal, I took great delight in putting another line through it, sort of like the prisoner in jail crossing out the days on
That's the
the
bucket list.
calendar.
Done.
Yes, that's done.
You're saying it's hard for you to stay idle and just in pause, right? Because this started as you were retiring.
Well, I retired because it was time to go to a different phase of my life. I felt like our department at school had successfully made the transition to doing Invisalign. We had a number of very good faculty who teach Invisalign, so I felt like I could turn over the keys, so to speak. Our new chair was very good at Invisalign, and number of faculty, like I say. So that made it a little easier. And really my most, shall we say, significant work was really in trying to envision the future, trying to help the company to get to the next spot, to accomplish the next goal, and think about, well, what do we need to do next? And so what this did was it created an opportunity for me to continue working with the company and take all the work that I had. I didn't worry about the department falling apart, so to speak. If I left and they stopped doing Invisalign or something, the residents do more Invisalign, I believe, in our department than any department. they do about 35, sometimes 40 cases out of their 100 plus cases that they start. And that's a pretty good number. That means that they're approaching the halfway point of cases that they treat. And typically, an orthodontic department might do anywhere from 2 to 5, if cases of Invisalign. And a lot of that is because they don't have the faculty yet who really have the experience. And of course, our school attracted people who were interested in doing Invisalign. I recruited them heavily. And then I brought in outside speakers. And for instance, a lady named Sandra Tai, who's from British Columbia, comes, and she's just written an excellent textbook on it. And she's considered one of the experts in the world. And she's willing to come and teach our students. So I think in a way, I told them, they were saying, oh, you're leaving. I said, yeah, but it's going to get better. The people who are coming will do a better job than I did, and it will free me up to do some things that will make it better for you in the future.
You're leading to the change, Doug. But the purpose of this meeting was to talk about this present crisis and how the effect that it has on our industry. Can you tell us your perspective of things, how the COVID-19 will affect us as a dentist?
Yeah. Well, first off, I've always believed that anytime you have a challenge, you have an opportunity. And so for me, I've spent my time thinking about what we can do in the future based on our experience with COVID that could make our lives better than they would have been if it hadn't happened. In other words, to somehow come up with a positive outcome to this terrible tragedy of the pandemic. So for me, the idea was that I would try and envision how would a practitioner practice in the future. And I had already been involved with patient monitoring remotely as a project at Invisalign. And it became abundantly clear that if you had an Invisalign practice, you were in much better shape for this pandemic because, first off, you didn't have as many emergencies of pokey wires and broken hard appliances. You didn't have the liability of periodontal disease perhaps going on because fixed appliances can create more plaque and so forth. And then you also have the ability that you have a plan, a three-dimensional detailed plan of your treatment. And so what you can do, if you can figure out a way to somehow get a point in time of the position of the teeth during the treatment that the patient has, and then compare that automatically with the database that you have in the computer, you can say, bingo, that's how you're doing today. So it gives you a report instantaneously, so to speak, by superimposing the patient's present condition with what you have in the computer about where they should be at that point in time. Now, that's a big advantage because that's all digital platform. So a doctor, the way I envision a doctor in the future working on this remote monitoring is to have a number of screens in front of them. And I talked to some doctors about this. They think they could easily double the number of patients they see in a day if they didn't have to seat them in the chair and make them a new appointment and so forth with the traditional things. And then, of course, from the patient's point of view, the idea of going to the office. So remote monitoring, this pandemic has clearly moved remote monitoring front and center. And so what's going to happen in the future is we're actually going to have a better way to monitor patients more accurately. And I think those tools are already well underway. This would be eventually a three-dimensional system where you would know exactly where this patient is for that day.
Doctor, I think that the dental field, it's a little larger than just Invisalign. Do you think that leading the change you did in ortho, there's something that we can do about the rest of dentistry to monitor things from a distance? Is there anything that the
Sure.
patient can learn from this?
Well, I think, again, that's just the example that I happen to be involved with the most. I think the concept of telemedicine, remote dentistry, visualizations. I think no matter what you call it, I think there's many applications. Now, I haven't even talked about education yet. I was talking about just treatment at that point. But once the doctors can effectively remotely manage their patients without the patient actually needing to come in to be seen, that's one of the basic components. The other thing is that students nowadays, if you check with the average young, say in their 20s, they will frequently tell you that they would sooner learn remotely. And so that's the other component here, is remote learning. And I feel that we are now being forced to put things into digital format for remote learning because we can't get together. That is creating the opportunity to develop the systems that will deliver effective education. So we're getting an immediate test ground of learning. So there's two components, treatment and learning.
Also,
and
dentistry, there's a lot of red tape because we talk about this with Dr. Ouellette on several occasions. And you had the experience of leading a change through a conservative industry. You make people accept the fact that we can use plastic instead of braces. Do you think that dentistry can be something that can happen within the next few weeks or within a few days so our dentists can resume part of their practice while in pause? Is that something that you even imagine possible?
Yeah, I think a pause. See, first off, what I'm coming to is there doesn't have to be a pause because of something like a pandemic. In other words, if your systems are working for remote monitoring, and if your systems are working for remote education, those would be the two reasons why patients or doctors go places to learn and to do the treatment. So once you can do those things remotely, then you're all set. And I think this pandemic has definitely speeded that process up, mostly by virtue of acceptance of the people and the focus. I mean, Invisalign now is focusing on how to teach the doctors remotely by, things like what we're doing today, which would be reaching so many different people. I mean, some of these seminars, as you know, can be 500 people, and you can really get a pretty good quality to the education. So my feeling is that we're going to be working home a lot more in the future because of this pandemic. And people like to work home. I mean, I see you there, you look very comfortable. I happen to have a blank wall behind me, but I think most people, like the idea that, well, instead of getting up and getting all dressed and putting a tie on, I am going to turn on my computer and give that lecture that I normally would give it for 2 hours to get there and setting up and so forth. And the interesting thing is that the students want this. I think that's important. The other thing is the cost of education has gotten completely out of hand. And the only hope we have now of truly containing that is by making it more efficient and cutting down some of the amount of effort that we have to spend. So I think we're going to be able to reach more people in ways that they want to be reached. And I think that they're going to learn more because the tools now, if you think about it, video conferencing, what we're doing now, 7, 8 years ago, the equipment that was available wasn't very good. And we couldn't have a conversation like this.
You know that
And so it's only going to get.
in education, there's no red tape really, because mainly people can just connect. In treatment, there's some law, there's a regulation, and if we come back to the fact that is there any way for us to resume, based on your experience, our practice right away using the tools that we have available? I was asking because you tell me that you need some screen in front of you. What would be the technical requirement so everybody can start monitoring the patient from a distance?
Well, as you know, there are systems out there today that allow the doctor to do a virtual exam. I mean, this has been going on in medicine for a while, and talk to the patient, get to know them, understand their needs. And then now there's always the question about an x-ray, if that's needed, or some test, diagnostic test. They might have to go someplace for that. But after the face-to-face, or not face to the virtual meeting with the doctor arranges this and then organizes a treatment plan and then presents the treatment plan to the patient remotely. And then the patient comes, if it's for the delivery of the initial service, obviously that would be a required visit, but then they would go into a remote monitoring where the doctor would decide when and if we need to see the patient in conjunction with the patient's decision. But I believe that you can actually monitor patients, if you have the right tools, more effectively remotely than you can even with your own two eyes sitting there in the chair across from the patient. Don't believe that. And I was certainly one of those people that said, you got to go to the doctor. You got to meet the doctor. You got to know the doctor. But it's just not what's going to happen in the future. We're going to have telemedicine as a very, very component of our delivery of care. And it's how we're going to learn too. And it's going to really bring the cost of education down. The average orthodontist now graduates, if they're from a public school system, they might owe $400,000 or $500,000 in school debt by the time they're an orthodontist. If they went to a private school, they might owe $800,000 in debt. Now, how can you go out, start a practice after you've lost all these years studying, and you have this huge debt, and you're paying a very large monthly payment, even as the minimum, and then be expected to start a practice? So it has already affected the way people practice. Our graduates frequently, they don't want to go buy an office. They just want to get a job so they can pay their student loans. And so what has to happen in the future is that there's going to have to be cost containment on these outrageous costs of tuition that we have. And so I think that will be another very good spin-off. So more accurate monitoring, more effective learning, because doctors will have much more choice and to pursue things remotely. And I think the cost of education can go down considerably.
And just for the people watching us, just remind you that Dr. Robert Boy has been part of the team leading a change in the conservative industry. So this is more than just ideas. This can go a long way, especially now that we have the motivation to change things or to come back and try to recoup the loss. This is just more than words, I believe. You have a plan.
Oh yeah, I mean, and it's working. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when and how we're doing it and developing it a little bit more. But there are orthodontists now who have remote practice setups. There is something called dental monitoring. Invisalign Company is working on several different projects for more effective remote monitoring. But all, of course, I'm very favorable in my feeling about Invisalign because they're a big company. I mean, Invisalign has a group of people who just bring new technology to the company. Their job, their engineers, they're just out there looking. And then they meet with the Align Technology who makes Invisalign. And they present, they say, well, you know, there's this new device coming. I never even device could do this. And the people would say, oh, you mean we could do that? And you don't even know that that task could be done until you looked at it and somebody solved a problem that you hadn't even realized was a problem or you could solve it. I mean, it's like, wow, you know? So
you keep working, eh? This is too fun to give away.
yeah. I mean, we are headed for, I'm telling you, a golden age. The golden age is going to be more personal freedom for doctors, more personal freedom for patients, and much lower cost of education. And so in the average day in the future, 10 years from now, I envision students being able to get their education in a more timely, more organized, self-paced kind of manner. And then they will not have the extensive student debt. So they'll be able to go out and have their own practice. And they won't be burdened with, if you have, the average practice starts 300 patients a year now. Well, how many patients could you start a year if they were only coming in for 3 visits instead of 30?
All I have to say here is Dr. Robert Borg for president. This is what I want to hear.
Well, I tell you, you know, I'm just a tool. I'm just a step along the way. And, but just like when I first saw Invisalign, I said, that is going to be a great helper. And the reason why it was going to be a great helper was because it was a 3D to diagnose the patient's needs. And up to that point, the only time we had 3D information were the models, the plaster models that we would have in our hand. And then all of a sudden, those models were in front of us in 3-dimensional images that we could measure. And I thought, wow, now that's a big step forward. That was a giant leap forward to do that. And then, of course, the idea of giving a patient a series of numbered appliances. I mean, what's harder than that? You're on number 2. Let's see, what should you do? Well, go to number 3. How about it? There's a little number 3 on the third aligner. It's on the box. It's stamped on the aligner. And tell them what it looks like when it fits. But now you see the other thing that's happened, cameras have become so good. I mean, 5G is going to be an absolutely incredible way that we're going to move to the future, because we're going to have so much data in our hand with our phone. We take a picture of what's going on in our mouth. That model, because it can be a 3D picture, as you know, an i11 has 3 cameras on it. But the 5G speeds up the transmission of large data sets. And of course, it's going to clouds, so it doesn't have to upload to some remote place or work with a physical hard drive system or something like that. It's just going back and forth. And so what happens is it happens fast. And you know yourself, if you added up how much time you spent in front of a computer, just sitting there waiting for something to happen. I mean, what a deal. That's gonna largely go away. I mean, how about that for a deal? And that is honest.
Unfortunately, this is all the time we have, but usually I'm asking my speakers to conclude with a message of hope. In your case, I'm gonna twist this a little bit. I promise to not force your hand, but knowing all that you have to say, next Friday, we're gonna have a Zoom conference, hopefully with 5 more people, to talk about the future of dentistry, especially teledentistry. I would like to formally invite you to be part of the panel and to keep this discussion going because you have more than ideas. In your experience, you have led a conservative industry to a change. And right now we need this, but for yesterday, please accept my invite.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I'm committed to the idea that the future is going to get better if we allow ourselves to open our minds and develop and think ahead, think out of the box. I like that expression, think out of the box.
Dr. Boy, it's a rendezvous next week, and let's try to have all the thinkers of a profession together to make a change. And I'm repeating myself, if this can happen within the next few days, we have a way to resume dentistry before the end of this pause, and we won't have to face a crisis by May or by June, facing empty schedules.
Well, I think there's going to be a shifting, and the shifting has already started, luckily. But I envision personally that we'll be back to, provided the models of the disease are accurate at current, but if they are, I predict by the end of the summer, we're going to be back to a fairly normal routine. And then it's going to just get better, though. See, that's the point. It's not that we're just going to get back to where we were. When we get back, we're already going to be ahead of where we were.
So everyone, if you want to be ahead, be with us next Friday. Dr. Boy will be with us. Thank you so much for your wisdom and sharing the hope, because when this time, we need that. We need hope and we need actions.
Good. And what time next Friday?
It's going to be from 1 to 3 next Friday. And
1 to 3?
Oh, yeah.
So that's 10 o'clock my time, California time.
Yes. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah. You have to wake up a little sooner.
Yes. I might be a little early at 10 your time, or 1 o'clock.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
And
You bet.
we'll see you next week.